Good morning, I'm Dan Winter from South France, fractalfield.com, and I'm here with Lara. And today we're going to be talking about the ancient Magdalene myth and how that brings meaning to the present. And Lara's going to do a beautiful intro, but first, I need to say that this is the beginning of a series of films entitled, with the notes, The Real History and Science of the Grail and the Spiritual Destiny of the West. That's the title of this series of films. And today's film is focused in on the Magdalene myth and how that inspires the spirituality and the meaning of the bloodline, and putting that myth into a much bigger historical context. So we're going to be actually talking about the extraterrestrial and stellar origins of the Magdalene story and how that comes right down into the present and where we are in South France. And we've been leading Science of the Grail mystery tours of South France for over 10 years, so we have a lot of experience in this. And Lara and Ari, who are here with me, Ari is making the film, and he's smiling right now, and Lara is here researching the Magdalene story on this day of the anniversary, and she's going to tell you about that.
Yeah, it's a very special day. I'm Lara, by the way. Today is the Mary Magdalene story to remember the Cathars and Mary Magdalene, the life of Mary Magdalene. And coincidentally, we are here today filming this film about Mary Magdalene. And we want to find out some information about the places to visit, because after this visit we are going to look for this beautiful sights and experience the energies there. And Dan has so much nice information about it, and we are totally inspired to share this today with you.
And we're going to answer Lara's questions, and she's going to have fun questions.
yeah, I guess.
And the anniversary that Lara is talking about, I believe, if I understood, when we were just studying, when the great Cathar Parfaits died, perhaps around Montsegur, he actually said, the legend is that the Cathars would return in 700 years. And my hair is standing. Yeah, 700 years. And I believe that date was 1321. That's what we're told. And you add 700, where are you? 2021. Hello! This is the day. It's like July 22, supposedly. This is the anniversary of. And they would return with the laurel. And their meaning to that is part of our story. So
yeah, perfect.
It's a blossoming flower, as it were. But the point we wanted to make here is that if we give a much bigger historical context to the Magdalene myth and how it inspires so many young women today, we might make a connection to the science of how bliss ignites the blood and raises the tower, the Magdalene. And actually, that is essential to where we want to go with this today, is how we connect the myth and the history with the science of the ignition of blood and the physics of bliss and kundalini. And so maybe we start there a little bit on the biology, that the amygdala of the brain is where the mouth of the snake brain feeds the juices of bliss into the bird brain. Now, classically, the snake brain, the reptilian brainstem, is thought of as a bit more female, and the bird brain is thought of as a bit more male, although that's perhaps superficial. But the point is that the biomechanics of Kundalini, which we just made a film with Ari, goldenmean.info/Kundalini, and as you remember from that film, quite clearly, the low-frequency spine liquid pump, sacrocranial, is literally pumping up the sanchidan, the snake venom, as it were, or the power of the tailbone, which is actually includes the sexual juices. And when they arrive at the bird brain, the Quetzalcoatl the serpent has fed the eagle, and Quetzalcoatl returns. What that means is the reptilian brainstem delivered the raw material, juices of bliss, to the bird brain, and the ventricle horns literally crystallize. You might get a little horny, and actually that's, remember, Lucifer had horns and Moses has horns, and that wasn't because they were the devil, it's because their kundalini and bliss was ignited, and those horns are literally their plasma wings, indicating their plasma cocoon could take wing, as in Coulomb, Columbus, the Coulomb is the myth of the plasma took wing. We'll get to that when we talk about the Grail across the Atlantic. So, the igniting of the bird brain happens through the mouth of the snake brain named amygdala. One of the important roots of the term Tour Migdal, the Tower Magda, which, remember, Saunier at Rennes-le-Château in South France traveled to Girona to study how the esoteric sect of the Jews had built, the Kabbalists, had built the Tour Migdal at Girona and made a model of that, which became that famous Tower Migdal at Rennes-le-Château, center of the Grail Mysteries, apparently to look out over the valley at Rennes-le-Château, where many, here right in South France, firmly believed Magda is buried.
Yeah.
And there's actually many films here of the actual friends of ours who went and dug and found that what they believe actually is the remnants of Magda, including this the grave there at Arc.
But would you say that it's a replica in Rennes-le-Château, or?
There are many who believe the actual bones are there, although the real history, I mean, let's say the Essene history of the Black Madonna story, which we're going to get to in a minute here, believes that that she was buried north of Arles at Saint-Remy,
yeah.
which we're actually going to use a graphic of Saint-Remy because there's 5 caves around Saint-Remy named Mary Mag, which make a pentacle, and one of those is at Marie de la Mer, which is where those 3 Marys came ashore, and we're going to tell that Black Madonna story here in just a minute.
Yeah. But is this also the reason why you took the people to Saint-Remy?
Yes, see, that's very important. See, Vincent Bridges told this story, and that's part of our history story, in our Malta series, and the films are online at goldenmean.info/Malta. And Vincent Bridges, who's a very famous alchemist and tells the Dee and Kelly story, taught about this history of Saint-Remy and the Black Madonna there, and the films are there of that conference about Magdalene, actually, goldenmean.info/Malta. And that is the story of the Black Madonna, who was black because she was Egyptian.
But is the Black Madonna is the same? Because I heard that the Black Madonna is often related to Mary Magdalene.
Yes, exactly.
But they are one and the same?
Well,
or?
Remember, if you've been there, and I have, when the gypsies at Marie de la Mer take the casket of the Marys, the Black Madonna, down to the sea, and when they raise it back up in the church, I had the biggest meltdown I've ever had in my life, practically. So I know that there's memories of a bloodline there, and I studied that. And when you say, is the Black Madonna Magdalene, if you ask the gypsies, the short answer is they would say yes, I think. But there's many versions of this story.
Yeah.
But we want to get closer to the real history. In order to do that, we're going to investigate why the Black Madonna was black, dark blood, and why she was Egyptian. Because of the 3 Marys, one of them is also named Sarah the Egyptian. And Sarah means the Asa of Ra, the queen of Ra, which is basically Enki. And the reason she's called Asa is because that is the name for Dragon Queen. And Dragon Queen in this legend means Mag. A Mag is the origin of the term Dragon Queen, as in Og and Magog from the ancient Celtic. Now our task here is to put those things together, because we've just brought in many pieces of the puzzle here. We've brought in dragon history, which implies a Draco history, and we know in Draco history they're ruled by an Orion Queen Mag. And what does that have to do with the term Magdala? And so we have to put together a very big story here to get a sense of context for that. Yeah. Like, are they the good guys or are they the bad guys? Well, they're both. We have met and encountered the enemy, and it is us. See, the term Mag, I think in retrospect, one of the good meaning for that is matrix of Agni, which is a matrix of fire in the blood, means a queen who was able to have a child, an egg, literally Humpty Dumpty's egg, who was able to have a soul, namely Fusion in the Blood, which is the title of our series on the ET history, fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood, because it's all about fusion in the blood. Because if your blood is imploding, DNA braid recursively, with bliss, then you make gravity and your aura goes to stars. Otherwise, you're toast, basically.
Yeah.
And the big picture of our story is every one of the extraterrestrial civilizations we're going to talk about right now, who is here creating the Magdalene line, every one of those civilizations, their problem was Humpty Dumpty's egg. The Pleiadians are losing it, man. The Dracos admit they lost long-term memory. The Syrians were directly involved, and in fact, if you study Akhenaten, the origin of the Egyptian Mag, it's the Syrians. But we need to put that story together in much more detail so you can see what the bloodline means. The bloodline means where is fire in the blood going to erupt, because those children will have an aura that goes into stars. The rest?
So is it that you are looking for the children of this, where it starts? Like
we're going back to the
family?
Root? Yes.
And then find the people who survive and go to the stars?
Yes, we're looking for those kids, but we're also looking for the intent. So we're going to talk about the intent of each of the extraterrestrial civilizations, which are at the root of the Mag legend. That's the purpose of this.
Okay.
And I actually have
you were
notes.
telling there were 3 Marys?
That's right. The gypsies in South France are very clear. This has extensively researched that when Magdalene family was dispossessed after the crucifixion of Jesus, the Essenes had an extended series of camps and relations and allies, one of which was very active in South France. And Mary, Mag, and Sarah the Egyptian, who was blue-black, arrived in a small boat near Marseille, which became the Grail Bloodline. That's the gypsy tradition, and you can study that in great detail.
Okay.
We've taught that for many years here. It's called the 3 Marys.
Okay.
But why one of them was black and clearly Egyptian is a question we're about to answer.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, and remember, that's going to also bring in this thread, which is very famous, which is that the origins of the Essenes, the origin of the Christianity, is Egyptian. All the historians have studied this. They're all called sun god religions. The book is called Out of Egypt by Ahmed Osman. And then Lawrence Gardner took up that banner and said, yes, you're right, it's all Egyptian. So in the Essenes, when you study where did the Essenes come from, you study Out of Egypt, they're all worshiping this guy called the righteous priest. It turns out the righteous priest is probably Moses Akhenaten, Egyptian. So clearly, no historian who's done their homework would disagree. The origins of the Essenes is the royalty of Egypt. So everyone who studied the Essenes agrees the Essene royalty, 2 main royal families named Jesus and Magdalene, Mary, were actually royal because they were from Egypt.
Yeah.
So later, I'm studying with this Templar, absolute wizard, genius, the most profound Templar studies that I know of, goldenmean.info/Buehler, B-U-E-H-L-E-R, William Buehler, who was my teacher in Crestone. Detailed, profound, we might show a few graphics here when we edit this film, of his major star maps of Europe, all based on Templar instructions for how to assemble the magnetic lines to put fire in the blood. Point being, there's a key moment in all this Templar legend called the repair of the fabric of time. And everybody now who's studied the physics of time knows it's simply charge rotation. And the fabric of time that can self-organize, named coincidence, is the charge implosion named fusion, which is fractality in time. So we understand that people who do too much time travel lose their soul. We know the physics now because they fractionated their blood, basically. So when William Buehler is teaching the repair of the fabric of time, which is to restore fractality in the symmetry of the rotation structure named time, he says repeatedly, that Magdalene is the daughter of Thoth. Repeatedly. And I'm there scratching my head saying, well, where does that fit together? But then if you study a little deeper, the name of the entire line of Egyptian kings, the name of that line is called Thothmosis.
So Magdalene, you could translate it like Magdalene is the daughter of the bloodline of the kings of
Egypt. You're getting it. You're getting it, exactly. And what was the intent behind that line? That's where we want to go with this.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, as I was saying, the name of that bloodline of king is called Thothmosis. And if you translate those words, Thoth means Tahuti, which where we get our word DWD. The line of David means Thoth. Thoth is Hermes, whose caduceus I call phase conjugation, so I politically represent Thoth Hermes on this planet for now. I'm the best you got, sorry. And in the physics, that's what my tradition is, which is the physics of how you make life force. And the name of that line of kings, Thothmosis, Moises means son of. So M-O-E-S-I-S to a cellular generation series. So Moises is son of. And you see, that's the fun part. If you study Out of Egypt and all these books about the Egyptian roots of the Essenes and Christianity, the turning point is when Akhenaten, who Vincent agrees was basically thought of as a nutcase in his day. Akhenaten had extended skull, the scoliosis, Marfan's disease, and the cone head. And he was promoting the one God religion, which is named Atun, which is why his son was first Akhenaten and then Amun, because Atun in Egypt meant Enki, sun god. Amun meant Enlil. They're the two brothers. Enlil got the spaceport from the Anunnaki, Draco, in North Africa, and Enki got the gold mines in South Africa. So Enki, South African, Black Pharaoh, Nubian, is whom the, who's the famous tribe in South Africa who named Enki? The Zulu shaman. Their name for Enki was Kiliman, as in Kilimanjaro. So Enki is South Africa, Nubian, Black Pharaoh, and Enlil, Amun, is North Africa, Cairo, and it's the Amun-Atun War, which is simply a proxy war for Enki and Enlil, which Akhenaten is in the middle of that war. That he is the focal point of that war. And it's important to see because the turning point is when Akhenaten is forced to give up on his dream of creating a city of the one God, which, remember, Moses is teaching one God, Akhenaten is teaching one God. Oh, is this a cure for schizophrenia? They were both doing the same thing. Maybe they're the same person. Lots and lots of historical researchers believe that Moses and Akhenaten were basically the same guy. The controversy basically is whether Moses was Akhenaten or Moses was the royal regent of Akhenaten. Either way, the story is about the same. So the historians who have studied this, and I recommend Ahmed Osman, Out of Egypt, and there's lots and lots of books about Akhenaten becoming Moses. So how does Akhenaten become Moses? Because that's the turning point when the Egyptian bloodline becomes the Essene bloodline. That's the moment of the righteous priest. Well, supposedly, Akhenaten had just designed his new city, Amarna, and couldn't balance a checkbook. He couldn't. He could not balance his checkbook. And the bankers, they're called the Amun priests, and they spend the whole day with the checkbooks in Akhenaten. So the economy of Egypt was going to hell, and they're ready to kick Akhenaten out of town because everybody's going to starve. And so the Amun priests come after him. So he changes his name and runs for his life, steals the Ark of the Covenant, which is the gold powder making device, and changes his name to Moses, which means son of. And the reason they called him Moses, son of, was because if you pronounce the name of Pharaoh, at that time it was a crime punishable by death. So they had to call him Moses, because if you pronounce the name of the Pharaoh and if you reveal that he's the son of the Pharaoh, then they're going to kill him. So that's why he had to change his name to Moses, run for his life, and found the Essenes and became a gold powder cook. Okay. And the Essenes were selling the white gold powder, later called Holy Communion, to all the royal families of Europe, because that was their cottage industry, and they made big bucks. And the technology device for making the white gold powder was called the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was originally Syrian. It was built for the branch of the Anunnaki Draco bloodline who couldn't navigate through the Van Allen belt without nuking their way through. They needed a container for their nukes. The guys in Sirius, which we're going to talk about, they're called the Sages of Gog-Sisa when we get later to the Anton Parks. So the Syrians built the Ark of the Covenant for them, which is an implosive capacitor, gold outside, high dielectric acacia wood. Implosive capacitance, we now know the physics. They called it the Plague of Azoth at the time, which means a plague of nitrogen. The Dracos breathed nitrogen. But actually the Plague of Azoth was also, historians agree now, as described in the Bible, was radiation poisoning. That's why that's the name for the ore of the Ark of the Covenant.
Okay.
Because there was a gadget in which you could stick your nukes and they wouldn't blow up on you. And the same device, implosive capacitor, had these gold angel wings with an arc. And an implosive spark is how you stabilize a gold atom to be stable in the monoatomic state, making it edible, called showbread, served in a round white wafer, later called Holy Communion. And your eyes would turn blue and you'd live forever, but there's some problems, astral hygiene problems we'll get to later. Mm. So why are we telling this whole story when we're trying to get to Magdalene?
Yeah, that's the question.
Did I answer my question? Okay, all right, fair enough. We got a key point in this story. Now this is another, remember, we're going to list about 8 different sources which give a bigger extraterrestrial origin to the Magdalene story. And one of those sources is a famous book called The God King Akhenaten by Daniel Stewart, in which he announces, and by the way, this fits perfectly another famous book series called Secret Places of the Lion by Brother Philip, who's really Mikhail de Abramovich, I believe, in which they're describing again and again this key bloodline, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, Jesus, Magda. So we're investigating that connection by telling the story. And in the God King Akhenaten, Daniel Stewart, he elaborately explained they have planned for at least 300 years for the culmination of their genetic investigations for the incarnation of Tutankhamun. Explains in great detail. And you know who he says did it? Who made the plan? The Syrians, which Anton Parks called Gog-Sisa. Now that seems to be some coincidence because when you investigate the legends over here on the other side, who designed the Ark of the Covenant? The Syrians, Gog-Sisa. And then later you get to Anton Parks, who's saying, Enki's mother designed the real genetic engineering, how they made the first Ensol Takadama. And who was Enki's mother? Half Syrian. So when they're saying the Syrians came up with a plan for an ensouled bloodline through Akhenaten Tutankhamun, there's 3 separate, completely independent sources that seem to agree. Did you have a question at that point, or?
Well, about what I know is that the Anunnaki were like experimenting, and
yes.
From that moment, that's what I understand. From that moment, there starts a bloodline. Mm-hmm.
Well,
who are the Syrians then in this story?
Yes. Well, remember, we're not saying the Anunnaki were the beginning of the bloodline. We're finding the context from which the Anunnaki story originated. And remember, as we refer to each of these sources, one of the biggest sources is Anton Parks, who is now, accepted and documented by the Gaia TV. They're agreeing that, and everyone seems to agree that Anton Parks did deeper scholarship than Sitchin. We know him very well. And the branches of the Anunnaki bloodline is a big story. It goes back to Draco. And they're called Uru, as in Ages of Uras, which is the title of the book. So if you want to know who an Uru-an is, a Roman, or you know where the word Europe came from, or Boers, Boers, or all our words with UR, Uru means of the ancient Draco blood, a branch of which is the Anunnaki, who are running from Pleiades. Pleiades was a female-dominated culture ruled by the queens, but they're running from their ancestors, the Anunnaki, which we call Draco Uru, are ruled by also a dominant Orion Queen Mag culture, which is totally consistent with what now our latest Draco experiencer, Johann Fritz, explained in our last TV series, about the problem of the Draco-Orion queens. So they're all running from the queens. I didn't mean to insult the ladies here, but when I first started studying ETs 30 years ago, the reason I began the study was I finally concluded after, all of my graduate school, that the origin of every religion on planet Earth is fear of women. And I insisted on knowing where that came from. And when I realized the origin of fear of women is ET, I had to start that study. But
so why is ET then related to fear of women? Because these planets are ruled by queens.
They're ruled by for example, let's take the Tegat and Pleiadian culture, which by their own admission, Swaru and Gosha, YouTube channel called Cosmic Agency, it's a total propaganda for these Tegat, female-dominated. They don't even admit that after millennia of using too much parthenogenesis and not enough real orgasm to make kids, they've got 80% women and their male genetic line is losing it. They don't admit that. They came here to the Earth DNA library to get something which is renewed genetic blood because they didn't have dominant males anymore and they needed them. That's one of the reasons the Tegat and Pleiadians are here, and they don't admit it. And because they don't admit their genetic agenda, that's why the Galactic Federation just kicked them out. And so Gosha and her propaganda, Tegat and Queen women, are going around and around saying the Federation is evil because they've got a hidden agenda. And the hidden agenda is there's something in the human genetic library which can make fire in the blood, or we're going to lose our soul, and that's called the Holy Grail. And we're going to come back to this.
In the end, it's all fear of death.
Well, exactly.
It's always death.
I think you're getting it, my dear. Good insight. Exactly. And the physics of what goes through death is precisely the implosive fusion in blood, we call it bliss, which makes it coherent, called light body, rainbow body, etheric body. There's a lot of names for it. Fifth dimension. It gets too many names. But it's a longitudinal coherent plasma bubble, which becomes plasma projective, named Migdal. Which enables the ability to propagate through death. That's the physics. And it goes into an array, it's a fractal array called longitudinal interferometry if you happen to be an electrical engineer. So here's the Pleiadian Tegatans. The Andromedans have announced publicly, hello, Tegat and Pleiadians, we just time traveled in 600 to 800 years in the future. Your gene pool is, sorry. And here's David Wilcox saying it's the Blue Sphere Alliance, doesn't even know it's the Andromedans. The Andromedans are the smart ones, let me tell you. And I've had my telepathic communications. But that's a bit beyond today's scope. But to resume here, or to review, not only are the Pleiadians here to get what we call the Grail, which is access to the DNA library for how to make a soul in blood, implode blood, but the Dracos have the same problem. And that's where we go back to our story. But did you have more questions first?
I want to go back to the moment you told, like, the fear of women.
Yeah, why are we afraid of...
Yeah, but
maybe he can explain.
How I understand the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene is Mary Magdalene is sharing the story of Jesus, how he made the way through death to life.
Yes.
So
exactly.
It's not the story of the woman like Mary Magdalene. It's the story of Jesus.
Well, it's a story of what is Migdal. Remember, if you go back to my Egyptian origins, Jesus becomes literally Tutankhamun. And Tutankhamun is the result of 300 years of genetic planning because, and I admit, I get a piece of this puzzle because when I went to the gold sarcophagus of Tutankhamun in Cairo, I swooned, I fainted. I had a bliss experience. And so, people say, are you a reincarnation of? I don't think so. But I have a piece of the memory for sure. I remember, for example, the priests of Egypt trying to use Tutankhamun to make rain, literally. Because I'm a rain man. I asked Valerie, I can make rain. It's like I studied how what's the famous Indian guy that makes rain? He was looking at the belly of a black beetle, rolling thunder. And I realized that the nervous system of the belly of the black beetle he would tickle to make rain was fractal. Took me a while to figure that out. I can do it with pine cones sometimes. So I inherited little Tutankhamun's ability to make rain, which is what Kundalini is, and we've taught that physics for years. goldenmean.info/rain. So I have a piece, I share in, hopefully with the whole species, a piece of the memory of Tutankhamun. And remember...
So of Jesus.
Well, close. Close. Let's not go right there, but let's say it's close. But remember, every pharaoh knows that as a pharaoh, you are fired if you cannot make rain. Every single pharaoh knows. In fact, how Egypt ended, every anthropologist who ever studied it agreed, the rain stopped. That's what killed Egypt. There's no other way to summarize. So if you didn't make rain, you got fired. And after 300, there's even a name for this. It's called the willed mutation of the species. After X number of generations of the maximum yearning of the moment of death, the child is going to inherit the yearning of the ancestor. And the yearning of that ancestor was, if you can't make rain, you get fired. So Tutankhamun was a rainmaker.
Yeah, but I guess it's not about making the rain. It's about making the contact with something.
Well, remember, the physics of making rain is the ability to make a little bit of capacitance which is implosive enough to cause vapor to form a droplet. That is the physics. So here's the vapor out there, and what's going to teach that vapor to touch? To enable the formation of droplet. That's called Christos. To crystallize. Hint, clue, hint, clue. So if you watch a little child, most little kids, if they're blissful and dancing barefoot in the mud, well grounded, called access to fractality, when they look up and pick a cloud that they love and focus in it, they can make a hole in that cloud. Almost any child can do it. And we teach the electrical engineering of how that works. Okay, their EEG became centripetal, and that implosive capacitance named fire in the blood is why a hole appeared in that cloud. So the physics of rainmaking is essential to the physics of what is the Christos tradition. And we're going to get later the origin of the term Christos, which is Kiristu, which was taught by the Syrians. So it isn't really about Jesus versus Magda, or who is the hero. Boring.
Yeah.
It's about physics. It's about using the story to teach the children the science of, which is beyond personality worship, which is obsolete and boring and disempowering, and causes religion wars. So we do not wish to teach personality worship. Boring, immature, childish, and causes religion wars. So we don't want anything to do with that. We'd like to use the story to teach the science, which is then empowering and transcends personality worship and miracle worship. That's where we're going with this.
Okay, and the story of Magdalene is actually the way of the snakes.
Make the Tour Migdal. How do you make a plasma tower? How do you make a Tour Migdal? Which is exactly the physics of Kundalini bliss, obviously. Yeah. And that's rainmaking. So basically, teach your kids how to have a bliss experience. And we've been teaching for decades that the definition of culture is not the color of your shoe polish and wine. No, the definition of culture is, do you know how to teach your children how to have a bliss experience?
Yeah.
If yes, you have culture. If not, you got crap. And any Aboriginal can tell you that. And I was teaching one time in Italy, and you know how much they're dedicated to their wine and their pasta. And the whole church, it was a church, stood up and cheered when I said that. They got it. They knew.
But I guess children are bliss. It's more like not to unlearn children.
Thank you. But if the children are living in the middle of big cities and electrosmog and bad vaccines and a few other problems, their aura doesn't get to... So if you can build a building...
But then it's important to teach adults to become blissful again.
Exactly, which is exactly where we're going. So when we get to the parts of this story, we learn that the dragon queens were experts on using a pent magnetic map to find the place or the cave or the temple where to ignite their blood. It was because the dragons knew how to put fire in their blood and make bliss, literally. And like, you know, the dragons breathe fire. Well,
But is it like a scientific process, like brewing in a big pot? Because I'm doing a education to be a clown, to teach myself to be blissful again.
well, that's wonderful.
Yeah, but these are very easy exercises.
Wonderful,
Just to
perfect.
step out of your comfort zone every time and do weird things.
Well, you see, yes, that's good. Beyond that, when you feel the moment, it's called a eureka or an ecstatic experience. You know, your hair stands up, you became charge implosive. We are sure that that correlates directly to the low frequencies in the heart rate variability, which is the physics of the sacrocranial pump, which is the physics of Kundalini, all of which fit my equation, and the physics of the brainwave golden ratio cascade series alpha, beta, delta, all of which ignite that implosive. So we know exactly the power spectra and the bodily harmonics that goes with that biophysics. And that's all at goldenmean.info/Kundalini, our last hit film with Ari. But so we would say that, yes, you're teaching the kids, you know, how to have bliss experiences, but maybe a little biofeedback and breathing exercises and yoga to go with at the climax of.
Yeah, to get them more conscious about it. Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah. So it'd be nice to use a little flameinmind.com maybe, or heart rate variability, breathing exercise. Actually, very simple. If they breathe the 10-second breath, which is the Mayer wave, that's the primary HRV-LF component and the primary pump wave of sacrocranial bliss. So breathing exercise.
In this way you can add to your, or in your, how do you call it, when you raise a child, you can put this in the...
Yeah, and even when Iris is teaching our children to see without their eyes, which is a bliss trance experience, basically it's an extreme of relaxation. Approach to bliss, relaxation creates conductivity, which is the physics, and then it is a brainwave state where the alpha to gamma cascade has both golden ratio and octave components. So your brainwave's imploding to bliss, becoming centripetal, the little tornado forms a plasma vortex, the definition of consciousness. In the center of the plasma vortex, in your head, suddenly an eyeball forms in the plasma vortex, explaining not only the moment when the kids see without their eyes, they say a little wormhole formed inside their head, every single child agrees, but also explain the physics of how shaman take vision outside their head, because that plasma tornado, which we call consciousness, is an eyeball when the tornado is brought to focus. And that ability to grab that vortex and bring it to focus, the brainwave cascade, the sacrocranial, the Kundalini physics, the bliss experience, that's what creates eyeballs in the first place. It's the physics of perception. That physics of the Y fractal phase conjugation is the definition of perception, elaborately with equations, fractalfield.com/conjugate perception. So all these people who want to know what the physics of consciousness is, sorry, we know. It's a plasma vortex. It ain't complicated.
And do you have more on your in your notation on your what we need to discuss in this episode?
Well, so we got carried away. We were draining the swamp, and then suddenly we were up our ass in alligators. But no, we were supposed to finish the ET content. Well, just to try to finish the story. So when they announced that they planned for the bloodline from Egypt, which became the Essenes, and then the daughter of the royal family of Egypt, which is the royal family of the Essenes, called Magda, arrives in South France, named Sarah the Egyptian, which Thoth Hermes has announced as his daughter, which is Egyptian, which is the Black Madonna, which is where they can put fire in the blood. We've got a little bit of history here, and we're going to lead up to the Black Madonna story, which becomes the Essene climax when the Holy Grail is made. So we're going to explain how John Trophime made the Platen, the flat stone, called the Holy Grail Platen, which the Roman legion carried around for over a decade, which later was called the Holy Grail. And how he melted that stone, it's his knee print in that stone, with the coherent plasma of his aura was an Essene rite. And our Essene expert, David Samuel, tells that story. But we didn't quite finish our threads of that story in order to get there. That's why we want to get there. It arrives here in South France, but we didn't quite finish the threads. We explained about the Syrian roots of Akhenaten, but we just should mention in passing that for those who want to do the homework, the section in Anton Park where he talks about the origin of the Syrian term, the Angal, which became our word angel, they referred to the bloodline that planned this as Kiristu, which became our word Christ. It's actually from the Syrian, the advanced. And the Kiristu became Kadistu, which is a subgroup of the Abgal, which are called the sages of Gagsisa, which is Syrian. I'm just giving you a flavor. If you want to do the research, then you could actually drag out Anton Parks and look all this up and find this hierarchy. Now, there are many places. AntonParks.com is great. We have an excerpt, big excerpt of that story at fractalfield.com/Zeitlin, Zeitlin, because Jerry Zeitlin, who did the analysis of Anton Parks, was a good friend of ours. So, here's an interesting little thread there. The word Kadistu was an Akkadian term, and when Joseph Smith was studying using the Urim Thummim, which are translucent tetracubed index plasma donuts, which were Draco genetic records, Akkadian, he was studying the old Egyptian called Akaldan, which are the genetic records which became the Mormon church. And the reason he's studying the genetic records is because the Draco Anunnaki were very skilled at keeping genetic records to find out where the bloodline lost a soul. And you see, the Draco believed what we call the Monsanto mistake, is what we call it. They believed that DNA that changes was defective. The opposite of genetic diversity, which we know is the fractality that creates a soul. And the reason the Draco believed that and how they lost their soul is because in the ancestral home of Draco, Alpha Draconis, the star system there had higher percentage radioactivity, and having lipid oil blood and breathing in nitrogen and out cyanogen, carbon bone, silicon nerve, long story. It's all at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. But the high radioactive environment was a trigger for a form of metabolic excitation similar to the famous brown nuclear battery, which excites electron cascades, quasi-superconductive. A very low amount of radioactivity is actually a stimulant to certain blood chemistries. Draco, yes. Human, no. For example, of humans who regressed back to that Draco characteristic of radioactivity actually being a stimulant, look up the Iradia couple in Russia, born too close to Chernobyl. So they had too many genetic aberrations, too much DNA changes because of the...
Oh yeah, because of the radioactivity.
Exactly. So their whole job was to prevent DNA from changing.
Yeah.
Monsanto seems to have inherited from Draco. And that became the caste system in India and the marriage law of the Aboriginals. It's straight out of Alpha Draconis. It's also why the male and female shaman families of Aboriginal Australia always had a separate language. That is Draco. And the curses between the men and the female shaman is the reason Australia is a desert. If you look up Wilhelm Reich, why patriarchy causes the form of deserts. The formation of deserts is caused by patriarchy, because if you do not have permission to touch among humans, water vapor doesn't get permission to touch either. Mm. So places that are suffering from drought right now need to study the physics of why patriarchy causes. Anthropologists cannot ignore the fact that patriarchy causes the formation of deserts. Look that up, do the science, and get a clue to why half the planet right now is suffering from drought. Permission to touch for people is the same physics as permission to touch for water vapor. Anyway, that's just one of our little themes here. But in terms of have we finished our story, So we got the Mormons, we got the Akkadian. See, the Akkadian is one of the two the male versus female language trees. And there's a beautiful picture, maybe we'll splice that into the film, of the male tree versus female tree of language. One's Babylonian, one's Akhenaten. And how that became the early Sumerian. And actually, Ari and Lara are Dutch. Do you know why in northern Netherlands the Frieslanders can read Sumerian, which is actually Draco, directly? The Friesland northern Dutch people do not need a translator to read Sumerian. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. And did you know that the word Sumer, Sitchin says South Sea, doesn't mean South Sea. Somer in South America means dragon. Sumer. Oh yeah, the other fun story there is when they discovered the Draco script on the caves in China, where the Draco star map is at the Senshi pyramids, similar to the Draco star map at Angkor Wat. The writings on the wall of that cave, later called wingmakers.com, just straight Draco. You know who could read them? Read the alphabet there? The old Hungarian, the Rovash Irash. The dragon cultures. There's so many fun pieces of the story. But we have to finish this because I think we're running out of time.
But is it like that they are blood family then?
Well, it's another example of this. If our chemist is correct, and you can read the chemistry of alien blood, which is the chemistry of Draco blood, that the lipid oil blood of the Draco, they had two forms of electron transport trigger in that blood. One was a red phosphorus and one was a white phosphorus. The white phosphorus Draco were thought to be unclonable. It's actually the origin of the Caucasian. Apparently, very powerful. The white Draco are the powerful queens. You ask Johann Fritz, he met them, okay? So you got the white Draco, and some of that blood, Enki's mother snuck into his cloning cooking pot, and he was shocked. But he got some of the first female, fertile females that way. But the red Draco, you have white phosphorus versus red phosphorus in that blood. Guess what the word Rothschild means? Red shield. That's a part of the red Draco ancestry, actually. And when we say, well, so the Draco is the origin of most of the major bloodlines of planet Earth, does that mean evil? It's not that simple. The Draco are very dangerous right now to humans. Ask Johann Fritz. The details are there. But if we hadn't inherited a chunk of that really strong DNA, I would never have had Kundalini, actually. So they were the survivalists of the galaxy. Now today, Johann Fritz is right. They consider themselves the top predator, and they're losing their soul, and they got troubles. But if they weren't our grandparents, we wouldn't be so interesting, actually. So, and Johann Fritz says, yeah, the Draco are the wardens to the jail called Earth. And he tells the story, and you got dozens of secret space program survivors that are talking about where the Draco went with that and why they're using the black goo, which is one of the most dangerous forms of black carbon powder, AI, on the planet, infesting the Kaaba stone and even John Dee's mirror. This is dangerous stuff. So they got sucked into some dangerous AI, and the Draco admit they've lost long-term memory. So they got a Humpty Dumpty's egg problem, and Lawrence Gardner, who's a serious historian, very serious, agreed with Out of Egypt that the Draco manipulated the bloodlines of the royal families of Europe for over 1,000 years, just like we were show dogs. And what were they trying to cook up? The Grail. A vaccine for the Orion Wars. How could the Draco get their soul back? It's all the same story. Where can they find fusion in the blood? So it's really cool when one of the lead SSP survivors comes back from the Montauk time travel experiments, and the chief Draco who's running the Montauk, the guy named Charlie, where was he always sending him? I think it was Alondra, I'm not sure. Where was he always sending them in the time travel? South France, to find out the threads of the bloodline, because Humpty Dumpty lost his egg. Do they tell Humpty Dumpty story, fairy tale? No. Well, all the king's horses and all the king's men could not put Humpty together again. In other words, even though we got all the royal resources of Europe at our disposal, we still can't make a kid with a soul, namely a lucid dreamer. And Humpty is the folded surface which has to be fractal in order for an egg to have the charge implosion named a soul. So that's the fractality of folded surface, which is the physics of what membrane implodes on a living cell to make a soul. So that's called Humpty Dumpty. It's a great fairy tale. And anyway, so we're getting back then to finish our story.
Yeah.
So because we're running out of time. So we talked about Out of Egypt, we talked about God King Out, now, and we talked about William Bueller. We're going to show some of those pictures, the Templar star map, and why Thoth's lineage became the Black Madonna. Okay, so what we did not finish was David Samuel talking about, so now we have Sarah the Egyptian, the three Marys, elaborately historically researched, arrive in Marie-de-la-Mer, South France, and she travels north to which is where the Essene colony of the Royal Essenes were, which is that pent star map of the 5 Magdalen caves and that famous town, and eventually leads us to Arles. And John Trophime is born of the Black Madonna in a cave. This is Vincent's part of the story, which he narrates elaborately at that film about the Magdalen history at goldenmean.info/Malta. And Vincent led us to that cave, looking out the mouth of the cave, and this is the most famous picture on the planet, practically, called Virgin in the Rocks. And you look out, we went to the cave. It's actually an ancient family home in a limestone cave. And we looked out the mouth of the cave, and we saw right in the picture, Virgin in the Rocks, the narrow granite tower right out there, depicted in the painting, which is where the Romans used that limestone quarry. And because the picture wants you to know where the Black Madonna, the Magdalene, had the child named John Trophime, which became the oral transmission line of John, called Bubba Free John. And even Adam Trombley says, we're all about the oral transmission line of John. John means eons, Chion, John, to branch perfectly, which is the ritual of John bringing the spark down from the mountain here in South France. So John Trophime learns the ancient Essene rituals for bliss. You watch the sunset as it's setting on the water. And that's called longitudinal interferometry. And you feel that flash, which is also the physics of Agnihotra. There was a drinking your urine, there was a purified diet, there was fasting, there was sun gazing. And if you study the deep Essene rites for bliss, which involved ritual baths extensively, and all the historians agree on that. And so John Trophime learns the physics of igniting his body with bliss, and his aura is so strong that when he knelt on that stone, which was the coffin lid, and remember, the main cottage industry of that town of Arles for the next 300 years is everyone in Europe wanted to come there to be buried, until the town screwed it up by putting a rail line through there, and the metal killed the plasma. Vincent taught that very well. So John Trophime aura melts that stone, just like Padmasambhava. You can go there, and Sam is the other name for Enki in India, and put your hand where he melted the stone many times with his plasma. This is instruction in the physics of growing your aura. He melted the stone. Well, John Trophime, of that line, he melted that stone coffin lid, which the Romans carried around for the next 10 years, called the Holy Grail. And so studying the Grail myth, and those who are clairvoyant enough, they see the geometry of that plasma implosion in the blood, which is only perfected fractality, and our animation of that is probably the best on the planet, goldenmean.info/Grail. So if you ask John McGovern in Australia why he can read every shaman carving on every cave in the planet, because shaman were seeing living plasma. So the shaman sees the living plasma imploding the fire in the blood. That's the Holy Grail. And that's the children of John, which then become. And that's where this story then goes to Holy Grail Across the Atlantic and Jean-Luc Robin and the history of Rennes-le-Château and the Grail Across the Atlantic. Now, the Grail Across the Atlantic and Pandora's Box are in the next segment here, which is the Holy Grail Blood Comes to the West. But just a thread we didn't finish in this story to try to make it complete, and then more questions. Yeah, but we didn't finish. When Lawrence Gardner tracks the ETs manipulating the royal families of Europe that were all related to each other, he says there's a certain point in history, what's called the Disposini, S-Y-N-I, Disposini, I believe, which are, you can think of it as dispossessed, but actually the Disposini term refers to the actual bloodline of Jesus. That's why he calls it the Genesis of the Grail Kings. And Lawrence Gardner was no slouch. He was a real historian. So he got it, he says the Dracos are the heroes of history. And that's what the Shining Ones, our friend Brown, said too. The Dracos are the heroes of history. And then, David Icke says the Dracos are the bad guys. Well, they're the good guys and the bad guys. But we wouldn't have been much genetically without them. Anyway, there was a certain point in history when the king and the pope conspired to dispossess the real royal families of Europe who were the royal bloodline. And remember, that included, this is all Lawrence Gardner's scholarship in Genesis of the Grail, that included Catherine of Russia, that included the Elizabeth line, Victoria line of England, this included the royal German line. All of these bloodlines were directly the same family because the ETs were cooking up Humpty Dumpty, the Grail. And at one point when they conspired to dispossess all of these royal bloodlines, two things happened. One is Saunier got the raw material to blackmail the king and the pope, because the real Jesus line, and that's how Saunier got rich, basically. He blackmailed the king and the pope because he got the genetic records at Rennes-le-Château that proved when the real bloodline of Jesus was dispossessed because of the evil king and pope. That's a short summary of Genesis of the Grail Kings by Lawrence Gardner. But another thing happened, and this is going to lead us to our next episode of Holy Grail Comes to the West. The King Louis line of France, which is, remember, the same family, the Sun King, same family, the Dauphin, the last Dagobert's return, the last Louis, the 17th, the Dauphin, he escapes Europe and becomes Daniel Pesur and Pandora's Box and the story of Holy Grail Across the Atlantic, which is our next episode.
Because he is like going from Europe.
Because the whole reason, this is why this video series is called The Real Science and History of the Grail and the Spiritual Destiny of the West, was because they kept going west. They kept killing the descendants of Jesus over here, so where do they go?
Yeah. But Mary Magdalene also went to England after France, right?
Glaston. The hides of Glaston, exactly. So yes.
And they went even further.
That's right.
To America.
Yeah, so we talk about that path west and how they got there and what happened in the spiritual destiny of the Americas, and that's where we're going next with this. But have we sort of put some pieces of together for you of the story of Magdalene? How have we done here?
Well, now I understand better the Holy Grail. It's not a thing, it's like a knowledge.
Yeah,
and it's a knowledge that's been chased by like people who are interested in it, but with some good intentions and some bad intentions.
Everybody who wants a soul needs the Grail because...
But they forgot maybe that they can find it, you can practice and find this bliss experience in yourself.
If you look at the Grail, if you get the frequency of the Grail, you do the Grail in the land, the Grail in the heart, the Grail in the body. It's all about the physics of fractality because it's the physics of bliss.
Yeah, so it doesn't have to be like a war kind of thing.
Maybe we should cancel the war. What do you say?
Yeah. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Let's cancel the war. We don't need it.
Yeah. So I guess it's a good idea to bring people to these places and practice.
Yeah.
To experience this feeling of bliss.
Yeah. Take Jerusalem, for example. Uru Asa LM. Uru means ancient dragon blood. Asa, queen of. El, the place of the phase shift translation of vorticity. Elohim, where the transverse becomes longitudinal, otherwise known as Stargate.
Oh, yeah.
And the physics of Stargate, always there's a war over the Stargates, because if you're stuck on a small planet a long way from downtown, man, but that Stargates is broken, so we should cancel the war.
Yeah.
Instead, to build the temple, the only definition of temple actually is a plasma container for plasma projectivity of bliss. That's the physics. And that's why the Ophanim Enochian became the movie Stargate. So that's...
But I have one question. This John Trophime.
Yeah, John Trophimius, they call it.
Because that's an important person.
Yes.
So who is his father, mother, or how did he...
we believe his mother was directly probably Sarah the Egyptian or the Black Madonna. Literally, the Magdalene line. So he was the lineage of.
Okay.
That's the point. John Trophime, absolutely. According to Vincent Bridges.
But what I learned was that Sarah was a child of Mary Magdalene and Jesus. And that is where the Templar starts. That fits.
That's perfect. So whether Sarah was the Mary or the daughter of the Mary, it's essentially the same story. Yes.
Okay, and then they got the John Trophime.
That's right. A descendant, direct descendant of.
Okay.
That's right. So whether Mary was pregnant with the son of Jesus, John Trophime, or whether it's the grandson of Jesus, but if you investigate the Essene history, they all agree on that. They know that John Trophimus was the bloodline of Jesus.
But even then, when you practice to awake the snake, and to make bliss.
Exactly, that's what it's about.
When you follow the practices of Jesus and Mary,
you
don't need to have to follow this whole line.
It's a fairy tale for kids. It's fine. It's not a bad fairy tale. But it's not worth wars, and it's not worth personality worship. It's not worth miracle worship. No, learn the science and wake up from the history, which was really a nightmare.
But it is interesting to know the history.
It's right, and to learn the science. So now we learn we'll show some of the Pence star maps as part of this film. We'll insert them in there. So where the magnetic lines converge and implode, you get the power to ignite blood, and you get telepathy there, and you get lucid dreams there, and
on these places.
Oh yeah, on the sacred sites. So we know exactly what a sacred site is. It's well defined electrically. It's fractal charge implosion.
And they are still active?
Oh, many of them.
Because sometimes I think...
Yeah, but the more that current archaeologists break the magnetic lines, the more they get deserts, and the more they lose bliss. So we have to teach this fractal magnetics of sacred space, or our children will not have the privilege of
bliss.
Exactly.
Yeah, how I see it also is that it's now the time that it's more important to practice bliss yourself than to get it from places on the earth.
And we can learn the lesson, but then we don't need jet airplanes. Exactly. I think she's getting it. Congratulations.
Well.
And on that note, thank you, dear. That was wonderful. Yeah. I think we've done good. Bye. See you in our next episode.